Okay. Hi everybody. We'll just give it a few more minutes for other people to come in. So just whilst you're waiting, guys, if you can just pop onto the chat function, there should just be a bubble at the top saying chat, and just put a little bit about who you are and what's attracted you to this sports science taster session. Tarek, you probably don't need to. Okay, so we'll just give it a couple more minutes. Jamie, if you give me a thumbs up if you want me to get going.
Yeah, I'll give another minute.
Remember, I won't be able to hear you.
Not yet.
Okay, so let's have a look. So, okay, brilliant. So thanks, Daisy, for that. So interested in studying sports science at university. So you make a positive impact on people's lives through sport and coaching. That's great. What are you doing at the moment, Daisy? What are you studying? Are you studying at the moment, or? PE biology and history. Okay, fantastic. So that will give you a solid foundation for sports science, which is great. I'm just trying to remember what I did. It was very similar. I think PE biology and geography. It was.
Again, and I've forgotten the declaration. Yeah, what I'm trying to do is after the approximately
Where are you from, Daisy and Prashant?
which I do know, I'm much confident. I have seen it in the past. They're a bit sometimes you just don't look at it. Sometimes I know that
The
problem
maths.
actually.
Ah, great. So it's a similar sort of area. I think it's something about being close to the water um, that gives you a nice life. Okay, got one more minute and then start. Yeah, just in case anybody's having a little trouble entering. Tarek, nice to see you again. Hope you're good. Okay, I think I'll make a start. Are you happy with that, Jamie? Yeah? Okay, so there might be some people that come in as we go. That's fine. I've got a colleague, Jamie, who's also around. So between us, we'll let people into the taster session. So welcome to our one of our sports science taster sessions. I don't know if you've been to any of our other previous ones. My name is Vicky Gottwald. Just gonna. Yeah. So my name's Vicky Gottwald, and this taster session is called Coaching Unplugged. And I'm just going to kick off. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and what I do. I'll talk about the applied relevance of this session. So what career pathways might it help you with, or what if you're in a position like Daisy, just looking at different universities and different courses. Where might the relevance of this session come into that? And then I'm going to talk a bit about explaining some of the science of skill acquisition. So in sports science, we have our sports psychology, our sports physiology, and people are often a bit more comfortable in terms of knowing a bit more about our sports psychology and sports physiology, but a little less so in terms of skill acquisition. And for me, Jamie, I'm sure will disagree, but for me, it's the best bit. And then we'll be looking a bit about how we can use what we know about skill acquisition, skill learning to coach a bit smarter. So if you've got coaching experience or you've got teaching experience, or if you're looking to go into coaching in the future, something Daisy's looking into doing, then how this can help us to be a bit of a better coach or a better teacher. And then today really is a bit of a whistle stop tour of skill acquisition. So I'll just point you in the direction of some further reading and resources, and then I'll pass on my email as well. I've got that at the end. If you've got any other questions or want to contact me directly, please do so. Okay. So before we get started, before we get into things, I just want to, off the cuff, I've got a few questions for you. Now, please don't worry about too much about getting these right or whether you're going to get them right or wrong. It's all anonymised, so I can't see who's answered what. Jamie's just had a go at answering all these questions, just to check everything's working. So if you can just, all you need to do is scan the QR code and you should be presented with three questions that you can just work through quickly. So as I said, it's all anonymous. Don't worry too much. I can't see who puts what answer, but they'll just serve as talking points as we go through the session. So let me just jump onto that. And any problems, if you've got any problems accessing it or anything, can you just put a note in the chat function as well, please? But I should be able to see that. Let's have a little look. Okay. Okay. Okay, two. So we're just waiting for somebody else. Okay, so you've got three questions there. First one, demonstrations are effective for teaching and coaching which of the following skills? Okay, let's have a little look. Okay, so I'll just give you a bit more time. Okay, so I'll come to the answers later, but just to tell you what we've got. So 100% of people think that demonstrations are effective for teaching and coaching simple motor skills, more so than complex motor skills or all motor skills. So you guys, whether right or wrong, you're on the same page with that. Everyone who's answered has also put the best person to do the demonstration when coaching a motor skill is the coach. So again, we'll come back to that as well. And then the third question, it doesn't matter too much if demonstrations show good technique. Okay, so again, everybody thinks that that's false. So we'll come back to that as well in a minute. Okay, so great stuff. We've answered those questions, and then we'll go back and forth to them. Sorry, if I turn my head, it's just because I've got two screens that I'm just jumping back and forth between. All right. Okay, so a bit about who I am briefly. So this is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of my life and my journey into sports science. So I started as an athlete, and this has probably been one of the most defining, I suppose, roles in terms of influencing my life and my interest in and passion for sport. I believe it or not, I'm actually pretty close to 6 foot, but I don't know what these Austrians eat in their Weetabix. She makes me look quite small there. So I've been an athlete. I've also been a coach, high performance coach, working at various different stages of the basketball world's national team pathways, all the way from under 12, who is that group is a lot of fun to coach, and then right through to senior level. Most of my coaching was at under 18s. We went where we competed at the European Championships. And then also I had a bit of time as a PE teacher. So after my undergraduate degree in sports science, I went into PE teaching. So some of you might be interested in following a similar journey. But please don't worry, your journey is never going to look the same as mine or the same as anybody else's. And my time as a coach, as an athlete, as a PE teacher, it's all led me into being a sports scientist, which is what I do now. And really, it's given me this interest in human movement and skill learning, and all of these different experiences I've had as a PE teacher, as a coach, as an athlete. Each experience has given me a slightly different perspective of skill learning and human movement that I think has helped me to be a better scientist. But the same as if you take an athlete, no athlete's journey to elite sport is linear, and the same as whatever career you go on to do, your journey into that isn't going to be the same as the person next to you, and that's absolutely fine. So I don't know if this was a couple of years back. There was a series of articles on BBC News. I don't know if you came across these. Essentially, there were some allegations against Hans Niemann, who was a chess player. So at the time, he had just beaten Magnus Carlsen. So Magnus Carlsen he'd dominated the field in chess, world champion, and he'd dominated for over a decade. Hans Niemann was still a teenager, and he came along and he beat Magnus Carlsen. And there was a lot in BBC News. I've never seen so many articles about chess. But there's a lot in the news about whether Hans Niemann had cheated. And he went on to admit that actually, as a child, he did use some computer support to cheat, but he hadn't done so on the world stage. And part of one of the contributors for that is that we know the world's best chess players, the world's best grandmasters, can now be beaten by computers. All right, if I ask you a complex mental arithmetic question, you're going to quickly be reaching for your phone or your calculators to answer that question. All right, so we've become with technology, we've become really good at replicating human cognition. But when it comes to human movement, we're probably light years behind in terms of a comparison. So just to illustrate that, so this is where I can't remember if I hit share sound, so I'm just gonna make sure when I shared my screen I hit so I'll just come off that a second, just make sure I hit share sound or you won't be able to hear it. Okay, let's go. Okay, just wait for that to share again. Okay, so just to illustrate that, so I said we've become really good at replicating some of human cognition, but we're probably light years behind in terms of replicating human movement. And this was at the time of me getting interested in terms of human movement and skill learning. So believe it or not, they have something called they have a world championships in robotic football.
Looking to start the break himself, taking his time. Left foot.
Oh, he can't get enough on it. Look at this.
Just leaves the defense in his wake.
And this is good football.
Tucks it in. Oh, what a shot. It's ecstasy.
Astonishing. This is not just a dream, it's a wet dream of orgasmic proportions.
Okay, slow going, slow going. Okay, so essentially, so it's just an illustration of how far we are ahead in terms of replicating human cognition, but how far we are behind in terms of replicating human movement. So there's a lot to understand still about human movement. So my interest as a sports scientist is trying to advance our understanding of human movement. We've come on a little way since there, especially since AI, but we're still a lot further behind than when we are in terms of replicating human cognition. And as a civilization, we've always recognised exceptional individuals whose performance in sports, the arts, science is vastly superior to that of the rest of the population. Okay, so I've just given an example here. I don't know if you've seen Armand Duplantis in the pole vault. The human movement in terms of replicating that, is absolutely insane. I don't know if anybody watched any of the Winter Olympics, some of the snowboarding or the skiing. Again, some of the things humans are capable of in terms of human movement, it's just mind-blowing. If you've got any examples or things that you find particularly mind-blowing, just stick it onto the chat and we'll have a look as we go. For me, it's this. I'm not a Basketball's my sport, as I said, so I'm not really into pole vaulting, but just I find that super, super impressive in terms of some things that they can do in athletics. If you've got any of your own examples, just whack them on the chat. Okay, so in terms of recognising exceptional individuals, especially in terms of performance in sport, but not just in sport, we always recognise that some people have this way, whether it's a magic bullet or not, there's something about them, there's something that causes that or helps them to be a bit of a world leader in terms of whatever it is that they do. So what do you think is the main contributor of expertise development? Can you just stick your answers on the main chat? So what do you think is the main contributor of expertise development, whether it's Tom Daly, Armand Duplantis, whoever it is, Sue Bird in the basketball, whoever it is that sort of blows your mind in terms of human movement, what do you think it is? What do you think the main factor is that's led them to there? Let's see what we get on the chat. So I'll just give you a bit of time. So what do you think the main cause is? What do you think the main factor is? So Daisy says internal motivation. Tarek says practice. Any other answers? Okay, so for Daisy, it's that sort of internal drive. Okay, so yeah, both good answers, and in the reality things, it's an awful lot of different things. So it might be, Daisy, you talked about a bit about psychological characteristics there. In reality, it might be a bit about our personality. It's everything. It's our personality, our physiology. You'll have heard of the big sort of nature nurture debate. It's everything down to where we go to school, whether we've got siblings, whether we go to private school, a state school, the number of siblings you've got, the gender of your siblings, whether you live in a small town or a big town, genetics, all of these different opportunity, all of these different factors. Okay, but somebody called Anders Ericsson, who you probably all heard of, even if you can't remember exactly who he is. He talked about the 10 years to become an expert. So Anders Ericsson realised and demonstrated pretty early on that one of the critical components of expertise development, as Tarek has said there, is practice. Okay, and there was a big, there's a big thing about the 10 years to become an expert. Has anybody read any of these books? If you've read any of these books, just put a note on the chat. So we've got one there. Talent is overrated. The Talent Code, so it says greatness isn't born, it's grown, and here's how. Bounce, it talks about Mozart, Federer, Picasso, Beckham. Okay, so it's not just sport we're talking about here. Ericsson's research to begin was in expertise development and deliberate practice in musicians. Yeah, so Tarek, you've read Practice, Talent Code and Bounce. Sorry, you've read Talent Code and Bounce, yeah. So they're all quite enjoyable, popular science books in this area. If you haven't read any of them, I'd recommend. I enjoyed Bounce quite a lot. But have a look see what you can find in there. So practice is a critical component. I would say, for me, it's one of the most important determinants of expertise development. Certainly far from the only determinant of expertise, but a very important one. But as science has progressed, and as the science of skill acquisition has progressed, what we know now is it's much more not just about the amount of practice you do, so whether we do 10 years and that turned, whether correctly or incorrectly, turned into our 10,000 hour rule, but it's much less about this amount of practice you do, but it's the way in which you practice, and that's what I'm really interested in as a skill acquisition scientist. So the way in which we practice. And as I said, this initial research was done in terms of looking at how long it takes to become an expert in music. All right, so some people will progress faster than others, but that was what the original research was in. So for some of you, you'll be on this cool because you're interested in career pathways or degree pathway in sports science. For most of you, that's the case. But it's equally as relevant if you're interested in any career pathway where learning a motor skill is important. So whether that's in physiotherapy, medicine, the services, the military, okay, it's just as important. So skill acquisition, learning, and in my modules at Bangor in sports science, the assessment, you can either do it in sports science or you can do it in any discipline you like where learning motor skills or teaching and coaching motor skills is important. So I have some students, they come and they do it in midwifery, some do it in medicine, sports therapy, physiotherapy, and then I get a lot of them that do it in sports coaching or PE teaching. Okay, so it's really important that with all of this stuff, you make it as relevant as possible and as interesting as possible for you. Okay, so we know that practice is key. All right, so practice hours and what that practice looks like is key. And players spend, if we take football for example, players spend most of their time in practice with the intention of proving technical skills. Okay, so we want to learn and develop technical skills. But there's a massive lack of scientific research relating to the effective acquisition of soccer skills, football skills, especially when we look at the amount of research there is in physiology or sports psychology. Okay, so that means that there's a lot of myths in coaching, and current coaching practice is often based on tradition, intuition, and emulation rather than empirical evidence. It tends to be this sort of vicious circle of this is the way my coach, this is the way I learnt a skill, this is the way I practice, so this is then the way I'm going to coach. Okay, but there's a real lack of scientific evidence supporting some of that practice. Okay, and as I said, this can lead to a lot of myths in coaching. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of those. and we looked at some of those. By the way, Jamie included, 100% we got those questions incorrect, so at least you're all on the same page. But there's a lot of myths. You know, something as simple as using a demonstration in sport, but a lot of this learning is just not included in coach education, so we get a lot of these myths. So a lot of people think that demonstrations are always effective. You guys all thought that demonstrations are most effective with simple skills. What we actually see is demonstrations are really only effective for complex skills. Today's a whistle-stop tour. We don't have too much time to get into the depths of the science behind this, but very simply, if we do a demonstration of a simple skill, there's just not much information to be gained from it. So it's actually, demonstrations are much more effective for complex skills where there's a lot more information, there's a lot more processing that can go on in the brain, and that's what really helps us learn. So demonstrations are much better for complex skills, but a lot of coaches don't have that knowledge and understanding of when to use demonstrations. Another myth that's common is blocked practice of a single skill is essential for skill learning. So we often see, when observing coaching, we see a lot of drills. So if you take, for example, tennis, we often see tennis players just practicing the same swing over and over and over again. Maybe it's a volley, they're working on their volley, and they just somebody serves to them and they're just doing the volley over and over and over again. So block practice is when we just practice the same skill in a repetitive fashion. Okay, but actually what we see is, even though the skill looks really good when we're practicing, it's not very good for learning. Okay, and what we tend to see is then it doesn't transfer into a game situation. So as a coach, we need to throw a lot more chaos into practice. We need to be practicing lots of different skills in the context of each other, which is more challenging. And in practice, it will look like our athletes aren't learning as much. Their performance will be much worse. But actually, if we're patient, a bit more chaos in practice can lead to much better learning. It used to be thought that feedback, so augmented feedback, that's just your external feedback, from a coach should be frequent, detailed, and provided as soon as possible. So we know that feedback is good for learning. It guides us to the correct movement, if you like. So it's thought, well, we need to give it as soon as possible and as much as possible. Actually, we know now that a hands-off approach to coaches are keen to talk and they want to give a lot and tell their athletes what's going wrong and what can be done better. But actually, we encourage now a much more hands-off approach to coaching. We need to give athletes time to be able to process their own proprioceptive kinesthetic information so that they can process that inherent sensory information for themselves. Okay, our job as a coach in a way is to try and make ourselves redundant. So they're just some examples of some common coaching myths. And the great thing about university is one of the main skills university will teach you is this critical thinking skills, so that you're able to identify what's true and what's maybe not quite accurate, and so that we can adopt an evidence-based approach to coaching. And then the only other question that I haven't answered on the Mentimeter is it was about who needs to do who needs to do the demonstration. So everybody thought it needed to be the coach. And this links with, so do demonstrations need to be perfect? Or your question, I think, was, does it matter? Does it matter if the demonstrations aren't perfect? And a lot of you thought, well, all of you thought that actually the demonstrations need to be correct. And similar to what I said earlier, actually, it's much better to watch practice that's got a few errors, or watch a demonstration that's actually got a few errors in it. Okay, so watching practice that's got a few errors in it, it enables us to be much more involved in the sort of error detection and correction process, and it helps us to learn. So actually, we don't need to do a perfect demonstration. We don't. If anything, it probably shouldn't be the coach that does the demonstration. It helps if it's somebody of a similar ability, age, gender. But the key thing really is that the demonstration doesn't need to be perfect. We can engage in a lot of processing from watching imperfect demonstration. So skill acquisition, it's an applied science. It addresses the performance, learning and refinement of sport and movement skills across the spectrum for novice to expert performers. So it's my job as a skill acquisition academic to try and raise the profile of skill acquisition, and ensure that there's a pathway for skill acquisition practitioners. As I said earlier, a lot of people make this assumption that the coaches have this knowledge, but it's just not. A lot of it isn't incorporated into our coach education programs. Okay, so how can skill acquisition help coaches? It can help us design practice sessions. It can help our athletes and our learners learn skills. It can help them refine technique, help us design practice sessions that develop skills that are more robust under pressure. It can help us develop decision-making skills and periodized skill learning. So when we think of periodization, we're really just talking about planning. You might have heard of your micro cycles and your macro cycles in terms of our coaching systems when you're writing session plans, whether that's for one session or whether that's a whole season of session plans and development. We talk about periodization often in terms of physiology, so specificity, progression, overload, reversibility, tedium, but actually that's just as important when we're thinking about skill learning. So when we think about skill learning and when we teach this in terms of skill acquisition, sports science module, these are some of the main concepts that come into it. So the way we deliver instructions, the way we deliver demonstrations, the way we structure our practice, whether we're focusing on one skill or lots of different skills, practice under pressure, and the way we can develop effective feedback. And the way we do all these things changes depending on whether we're a novice or whether we're coaching experts, or whether we're coaching a simple skill versus a complex skill. So it's really important expertise to have. Just to give you some examples, I'll make sure we've got some time for questions in a minute, but just to leave you some example of some applied challenges that skill acquisition experts or skill acquisition practitioners or coaches with skill acquisition expertise can help answer. The most common one is we get players and we get athletes that they perform really, maybe you can relate to this, they perform really well in practice, but we go into that competition situation where things are a bit more pressurized and their skills are nowhere to be seen. Okay, so they perform, technically, they're technically really, really good in a practice situation, but as soon as we go into competition, those skills just don't transfer into competition. And that's the most common problem we see in skill acquisition. Maybe an elite athlete or a player needs to make, not even an elite athlete, maybe an athlete or a player needs to make a change to their technique following an injury. Maybe the coach has noticed a slight technical error in their movement that they want to correct. How do we go about doing that as a coach? Athletes or players are finding practice too easy or too difficult. Similarly, they might be getting bored in practice, or they aren't performing well under psychological pressure. So that's not just a psychology problem, it's a skill learning problem as well. Okay, so we look a lot about practice with pressure. So these are all, we don't have time. Ideally, if we get another one of these sessions, we can delve into some of these problems in more detail. These are some example problems you might come across as a skill acquisition expert. And I often say, so skills practiced in the zoo don't usually show up in the wild. And that's often what we see. We see a lot of drills-based practice going on. And then we come to game situations and not surprisingly, these skills don't show up. Okay, so it just sums that up really nicely. But just to finish on, it's really important that we understand, or we know as a coach, what we're trying to achieve as a coach. We need to understand why we do things the way we do, why we make certain decisions, and what we're trying to achieve as a coach. There might be sometimes as an athlete where we're just practicing to maintain, okay? We might be in the thick of the season, we're not really trying to learn new skills, we're just trying to maintain a skill. Sometimes we're trying to learn a new skill. Okay, maybe in the off season we want to learn a new skill. And then sometimes we're really working as a coach and getting our players or our athletes to be able to transfer their skills into into competition environments or into high pressure environments. So I'm just going to walk you through this graph. This is just an example of one of the frameworks we might use as a skill acquisition expert when we're supporting. Often a sports psychologist or a physiologist, they might be more likely to support the athlete, but as a skill acquisition practitioner, we're more likely to be working with a coach. So we can help them to design practice sessions that fit with what they want to achieve. So if you look on the x-axis down here, we've got something that says specificity to competition. So that just means how similar is the practice environment to that of the competition. If we're doing a lot of drills-based practice, it's probably not very similar at all to competition. Maybe if you take that tennis example where someone's just giving you an easy feed and you're just practicing your volley over and over again, or a passing drill in football where you're just passing it back and forth to each other. It's quite divorced from competition. It's low anxiety. It's quite divorced from competition. And then on the y-axis, we've got task difficulty. So how hard is the task? So in that football, if we're just passing the ball back and forth, it's very low in difficulty. So if a drill is low in difficulty and also divorced from competition, it's probably, to be honest, a poorly conceived drill. There is a time and a place for everything. There is a time and a place for blocked practice, constant practice. Okay, but we need to think about the way we put these drills together. All right. Whereas if something is very high and more reflective of competition, we do a lot of I do a lot of scenario-based coaching where we're simulating certain situations. So in basketball, for example, there's this much time on the clock. This is the situation with one basket down. We've got an inbound ball. What we're going to do? It very much reflects the demands of competition, and it's high pressure and it's quite high in task difficulty. That's where we're looking at our practice to transfer. This top right-hand corner. This is our optimal zone. Okay. And then we've got this practice to learn, which is somewhere in the middle. So it's really important as a coach, you know what you're trying to achieve. There's a time and a place for everything, but that will change during the season. So just before we finish on any questions, these are some resources. They're mostly sort of popular science stuff. There's if you want a bit higher level, there's a Rob Gray does a really nice perception action podcast. The Playbook, Coach's Rules for Life on Netflix. That's a very enjoyable watch, getting a bit more into coaching philosophy. And there's some popular science books there, varying in terms of sort of popular science, and then some of them a little bit more academic as well. In terms, those two at the top right are a bit more academic in nature. That top left one, Myths of Sport Performance, I've got a chapter in there on coaching instruction, if that's something that particularly interests you. And then you've got my email address there if you've got questions that you want to ask as well. Okay, and then I'll leave you with these. If you want to go and have a little another look at our courses and what programs we offer, a bit more about what we do, then you've got those QR codes as well. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming along. Any questions you want to ask, if you just whack them, I don't mind, you can either put them in the chat or the Q&A function, whichever works for you. Any questions? Okay, we've got something. Let's have a look. Oops. No. So I think we've just got Daisy and Tarek now. So if you've got questions, by all means put them on the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. Otherwise you've gained 5 minutes of your evening. But please do, yeah, if you've got questions, Daisy, either get in touch on the chat or you're welcome to shoot me an email as well. I'm just going to stick my email address. Tarek, I know you've got it, but I'll stick my email address on the chat, Daisy, in case you've got any other questions you want to ask. No, okay, all right. Well, I'll leave it there then. Well, thank you very much for coming along. And oh, I'll just leave it because Daisy, I can see, is typing and Tarek's typing. So I'll just give you a minute. Thanks, Daisy. Glad you've enjoyed it. Yeah, please do get in touch. Thanks, Tarek, and hopefully I will see you soon. I know I've got an email in my inbox waiting for me. Thanks, guys. Nice to see you.